Hurricane Katrina, which struck in August 2005, is one of the deadliest and most devastating natural disasters in U.S. history. But beyond the wind and water, the disaster left behind a series of shocking and disturbing events. Here are some chilling facts about what happened during and after Katrina. Number 1. Thousands of people were stranded for days without help. When the levees failed and New Orleans flooded, tens of thousands of residents were trapped inside the city with no power, food, or water. The Superdome and the Convention Center became makeshift shelters, but conditions quickly turned nightmarish. With temperatures soaring above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, people were packed shoulder to shoulder, and sanitation collapsed within hours. The stench of sweat, urine, and garbage filled the air, and children cried from hunger as desperate parents waited days for rescue. Number 2. The death toll was much higher than expected. Officially, over 1,800 people lost their lives during Katrina. But some researchers argue the true number was far higher due to uncounted victims who died in the days and weeks after the storm. Many elderly residents drowned in nursing homes when evacuation orders never reached them, while others died from heat stroke, dehydration, or untreated injuries because medical aid couldn't get through. It became one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. Number 3. Bodies were left floating in the streets. Perhaps one of the most haunting images of Katrina was the sight of bodies floating in floodwaters or lying abandoned on sidewalks for days. With morgues overwhelmed and rescue teams stretched too thin, corpses remained where they were found, sometimes marked with spray paint to signal their location for later recovery. For survivors, having to walk past the dead just to get water or shelter left psychological scars that lasted for years. Number 4. Prisoners were left behind in flooded jails. One of the most shocking stories from Katrina was what happened to inmates at the Orleans Parish Prison. When the storm hit, many guards fled, leaving prisoners locked in their cells as floodwaters rose. Some inmates were trapped for days with no food, clean water, or functioning toilets, and rescue operations took nearly a week to fully evacuate them. Reports later described cells filled with sewage and people suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. Number 5. Looting and violence broke out in the chaos. With police overwhelmed and basic services gone, law and order in New Orleans nearly collapsed. Looters raided stores not only for food and water, but also for electronics, alcohol, and weapons. There were reports of armed gangs roaming neighborhoods, carjackings, and even shootouts. Fear spread so widely that rescue helicopters were temporarily pulled back after reports of gunfire aimed at them, though later investigations found some claims had been exaggerated. Number 6. Hospitals became scenes of horror. Several hospitals were completely cut off from outside help as floodwaters rose. Generators failed, leaving patients in sweltering rooms without air conditioning or working equipment. Doctors and nurses were forced to make heartbreaking choices about who to save as medical supplies ran out. At Memorial Medical Center, staff were later investigated for euthanizing critically ill patients who could not be evacuated in time, a case that still sparks ethical debates today. Number 7. The federal response was infamously slow. One of the most disturbing aspects of Katrina was how long it took for federal aid to arrive. It took days before enough food, water, and security forces reached the city, and many survivors felt completely abandoned. President George W. Bush and FEMA faced severe criticism for their sluggish response, and Katrina became a symbol of government failure to protect its citizens during a crisis. Number 8. Entire neighborhoods were completely erased. The lower 9th Ward was one of the hardest hit areas, with entire blocks washed away by the storm surge when the levees broke. Some homes were swept off their foundations, leaving nothing but concrete slabs behind. The destruction was so complete that recovery efforts took years, and many residents never returned, leaving behind empty streets and ghostly remnants of what had once been thriving communities. Number 9. Race and class played a disturbing role. Katrina exposed deep inequalities in America. Many of those stranded in the city were poor, elderly, or disabled, and had no cars to evacuate. Media coverage was criticized for portraying black survivors as looters, while calling white survivors finders of supplies. The disaster sparked national conversations about systemic racism, poverty, and how marginalized communities are hit hardest in crises. Number 10. Mental health crises and long-term trauma exploded. The psychological toll of Katrina was immense. Survivors dealt with PTSD, depression, and anxiety for years afterward. Children who lived through the flooding often developed nightmares and behavioral issues, and suicide rates among residents spiked in the years following the storm. The emotional damage of Katrina was just as real as the physical destruction it caused. Number 11. First responders were pushed to their limits. Firefighters, police and National Guard members worked around the clock, often with little sleep and no resources. Many first responders lost their own homes, yet still went to work rescuing strangers. There were cases of police officers commandeering boats to save people from rooftops, and firefighters wading chest-deep through toxic water carrying children on their shoulders. Number 12. Animal rescue became a massive operation. Thousands of pets were left behind when their owners evacuated, and many drowned or starved. Animal rescue groups scrambled to save as many as possible, but the sheer number was overwhelming. The heartbreaking images of abandoned dogs and cats sparked new laws that now require pets to be included in federal disaster evacuation plans. Number 13. Toxic floodwaters created a health nightmare. The water that filled New Orleans wasn't just rain, it was a toxic soup of sewage, gasoline, chemicals, and decaying bodies. Aiding through it led to skin infections, respiratory problems, and gastrointestinal illness. The city had to be thoroughly drained and decontaminated before people could return, which took weeks. Number 14. The levee failures were preventable. Perhaps the most disturbing fact is that much of the flooding could have been avoided. Investigations found that the levees protecting New Orleans were poorly designed and maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Experts later said the catastrophe was as much a man-made disaster as a natural one. Number 15. Some communities took the law into their own hands. In certain neighborhoods, armed residents set up roadblocks to keep outsiders from entering, fearing looters. The most infamous case was in Algiers Point, where vigilantes were accused of shooting at unarmed black men who were simply trying to evacuate. These events highlighted the fear, distrust, and racial tensions that erupted under extreme stress. Number 16. Economic impact was staggering. Katrina caused over $100 billion in damages, making it one of the costliest disasters in U.S. history. Businesses were destroyed, jobs vanished, and it took years for the city's economy to recover. Some areas never fully rebounded, leaving behind a patchwork of abandoned buildings and empty lots. Number 17. Mass graves had to be prepared with so many deaths and limited refrigeration. Authorities prepared temporary morgues and mass burial sites. Recovery teams worked in grueling conditions, sometimes pulling bodies from attics where families had tried to escape rising water. The process of identifying victims took months, and some were never claimed. Number 18. Crime spiked in the aftermath even after the floodwaters receded. New Orleans struggled with a rise in violent crime. Police forces were depleted, and thousands of residents were displaced. The chaos created a power vacuum that made some neighborhoods extremely dangerous for months after the storm. Number 19. The disaster inspired major policy changes. Katrina forced the U.S. to rethink disaster preparedness. FEMA underwent significant reforms, and new evacuation and emergency plans were put in place nationwide. While the storm was tragic, it changed how America responds to future hurricanes. Number 20. The human spirit still shone through despite the horror. There were incredible acts of bravery and kindness. Strangers shared food, carried the elderly to safety, and opened their homes to displaced families. Volunteers from across the country poured in to help rebuild, proving that even in the darkest times, hope and solidarity can emerge. That's all we got today. We appreciate you watching as always. Like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.